Two men stand frozen in the shadows of a barn, their forbidden moment shattered by a voice that cuts through the darkness like a blade. Well, well, what do we have here? The witness smiles, knowing this secret could destroy them both. Their entire world hangs by a thread. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The dust hung thick in the evening air when Jesse Cord first saw him. The new hand stood in the stable doorway, 19 years old, all lean muscle and nervous energy, hat pulled low over eyes that wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. The boy had arrived that morning with nothing but a bedroll and a letter of recommendation, so worn it might have crossed 3 territories. Jesse was 34, foreman of the Blackwater Ranch, a man carved from leather and silence. He had built his reputation on being harder than the land itself, expecting perfection and accepting nothing less. When the ranch owner hired the new stable hand without consulting him, Jesse's jaw had tightened, but he said nothing. He never said much. Now, watching the boy struggle with a saddle twice his strength, Jesse felt something shift in his chest, something dangerous. The kid's name was Elias. No last name offered, and Jesse didn't ask. In the West, a man's past stayed buried if he wanted it that way. But there was something about the way Elias moved, careful and contained, like he was used to making himself small, like he expected a blow that hadn't come yet. That first week, Jesse watched. He told himself it was just doing his job, making sure the new hand could handle the work. But his eyes lingered too long on the curve of Elias's shoulders as he hauled water. On the way, sweat darkened the back of his shirt in the afternoon heat. On how his hands, slender but strong, gentled the most skittish horses with a patience Jesse had never seen. Elias felt the weight of that gaze. Every moment, every movement, he could feel the foreman's eyes on him like a brand. It made his breath catch, made his hands shake when he reached for the bridle. He had come to Blackwater to disappear, to escape something he couldn't name. But under Jesse Cord's relentless attention, he felt more visible than he ever had in his life. The first time Jesse spoke directly to him, Elias nearly dropped the pitchfork. "You're doing it wrong." Jesse's voice came from directly behind him. So close Elias could feel the heat radiating off the man's body. The older man reached past him, his arm brushing Elias's shoulder, and adjusted his grip on the handle. "Like this. Firm. Don't let the tool control you." Elias's heart hammered so loud he was certain Jesse could hear it. The foreman's breath stirred the hair at the back of his neck. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jesse stepped back, and the cold rushed in where warmth had been. "Better," Jesse said, his voice rough as gravel. Then he walked away, leaving Elias trembling in the shadows of the stable. That night, Elias lay in his narrow bunk in the workers' quarters, staring at the ceiling. He could still feel the ghost of Jesse's presence behind him, the commanding way the man had corrected his stance. He pressed his palms against his eyes and tried to will away the heat that spread through his body at the memory. This was dangerous. He knew that. Men like him, men who felt things they shouldn't, didn't survive long if they showed it. The West had no mercy for weakness, and wanting another man was the worst weakness of all. But Jesse Cord's gray eyes haunted him, and the way the foreman looked at him, intense and hungry and angry all at once, made Elias wonder if maybe he wasn't the only one fighting something he couldn't name. The summer heat pressed down on Blackwater Ranch like a wool blanket soaked in fire. Every day the sun climbed higher, brutal and unforgiving, turning the earth to dust and the men to shadows. Elias worked until his hands bled, until exhaustion pulled him under each night like a stone tied to his chest. And every day, Jesse watched. It became a rhythm, terrible and intoxicating. Jesse would find reasons to come to the stables, checking on the horses, inspecting the tack, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, saying nothing, just watching Elias work with those storm cloud eyes that seemed to see straight through skin and bone. Elias started making mistakes, dropping things, forgetting which horse needed which feed, His body betrayed him constantly under that relentless gaze, and he hated himself for it. Hated how his breath would catch when he heard Jesse's boots on the wooden floor. Hated how his skin would burn everywhere Jesse's eyes touched him. One afternoon, Elias was mucking out a stall when Jesse appeared in the doorway. The foreman had been out riding fence lines all morning, and dust covered him from hat to boots. He should have looked tired. Instead, he looked like something carved from the landscape itself, all hard angles and contained power. "You missed a spot," Jesse said, nodding toward the corner. Elias turned to look, confused, because he'd been thorough. He was always thorough now, terrified of giving Jesse any reason to find fault. When he looked back, Jesse had moved closer, much closer. "Here," Jesse said, and reached past Elias to point, his chest pressed against Elias's back. His arm stretched alongside Elias's arm. His breath stirred the fine hairs at Elias's temple. Elias froze. Every nerve in his body screamed. The smell of leather and sweat and something else, something purely Jesse, surrounded him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the solid weight of the man behind him, the heat of him, the overwhelming presence of him. "You understand?" Jesse's voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, rough and low and dangerous. "Yes, sir," Elias managed, and was horrified to hear how his voice shook. For a long moment, Jesse didn't move. Elias could feel the rise and fall of the older man's chest against his back, could feel the tension in Jesse's body, coiled and controlled but barely, like a rope pulled too tight. Then Jesse stepped back. The absence of him felt like falling. "Good," Jesse said, and his voice was back to normal, cold and professional. "Finish up here. We've got a mare in labor in the north barn. I'll need your help." He walked away without looking back, leaving Elias gripping the pitchfork handle so hard his knuckles had gone white. That night, in the north barn, they worked side by side, helping the mare through a difficult birth. It took hours. The lantern light cast their shadows huge and strange on the walls. Jesse's hands were gentle with the struggling animal, patient and sure. Elias watched those hands, watched how Jesse spoke softly to the mare, calming her through the pain. When the foal finally came, slick and trembling and alive, Jesse sat back on his heels and let out a breath. For the first time since Elias had arrived, the foreman smiled, just a slight quirk of his mouth, there and gone, but it transformed his whole face, made him look younger, made him look human. Elias found himself staring. Jesse caught him staring. Their eyes met across the mare's heaving side, and something passed between them, sharp and electric and terrifying. Jesse looked away first. "Get some sleep," he said roughly. "Dawn comes early." But neither of them moved. They stayed there in the golden circle of lantern light, watching the new foal struggle to its feet, watching it take its first stumbling steps. And though they didn't speak, didn't touch, the space between them felt charged with everything they couldn't say. The days blurred together, each one hotter than the last. The other ranch hands started commenting on it. "Boss has been riding you pretty hard," one of the older cowboys said to Elias one evening, his tone carefully neutral. "You holding up all right?" Elias had just nodded, not trusting his voice. Because it was true. Jesse pushed him harder than anyone else. Gave him the most difficult horses, the worst chores, found fault where none existed. But his eyes, God, his eyes told a different story. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Elias had been working with a young stallion, green-broke and temperamental. The horse had been making progress, but that afternoon something spooked him. He reared, powerful hooves flashing, and Elias barely got clear before the stallion bolted, taking down a section of fence with him. Jesse came running. He caught the horse, gentle and firm, talking it down until the animal settled. Then he turned on Elias, and his face was terrible. "My office. Now." The foreman's office was a small room off the main barn, smelling of old leather and tobacco. Jesse shut the door behind them, and Elias felt the space contract, suddenly too small, too close. What the hell was that? Jesse's voice was low and controlled, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been shouting. "He spooked, sir. I don't know what. You don't know." Jesse took a step closer. "You don't know. That horse is worth more than you'll make in 5 years. You could have been killed. You could have." He stopped, swallowed hard. His hands had curled into fists at his sides. Elias saw it then, saw past the anger to the fear underneath. Jesse had been scared. Scared for him. "I'm sorry," Elias whispered. "I'll be more careful. I promise." "Promises," Jesse said bitterly. He turned away, braced his hands on the desk, head bowed. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" The words hung in the air between them, raw and exposed. "Sir?" Elias's voice came out strangled. Jesse laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. Don't call me that. Not when we're alone." He turned back around, and the look on his face made Elias's breath stop. Jesse looked like a man at the end of his rope, exhausted from fighting a losing battle. "I've been trying," Jesse said quietly. "God knows I've been trying to find something wrong with you, some reason to send you away. But you're good. You're so damn good, and every day you're here is another day I have to pretend I don't." He stopped, closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they burned. "You should go," Jesse said. His voice had gone hoarse. "Before I do something we'll both regret." Elias should have left, should have walked out that door and never looked back. Instead, he heard himself say, "What if I wouldn't regret it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jesse stared at him like he'd been struck. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," Elias said, and was surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "I know exactly what I'm saying. You're 19 years old." Jesse's hands had started to shake. "You don't understand what this means, what this could cost. I'm old enough to know what I want. And what do you want?" The question came out like a challenge, like Jesse was daring him to say it out loud, to make it real. Elias took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough to see the silver threading through Jesse's dark hair, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. "You," Elias whispered. "I want you." For a moment, Jesse looked like he might break. His jaw clenched. His whole body went rigid with the effort of holding himself back. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised one hand and pressed it flat against Elias's chest, right over his racing heart. The touch burned through the fabric of Elias's shirt like a brand. "If we do this," Jesse said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's no going back. Do you understand? This isn't some game. This is our lives, our necks. One wrong word, one person seeing something they shouldn't, and we're both dead." "I understand," Elias said. "I don't think you do." Jesse's hand moved, just slightly, fingers spreading across Elias's chest. "I've spent 15 years building a reputation in this territory. One rumor could destroy everything. Then why are you still touching me?" Jesse's hand stilled. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, so quietly, Elias almost didn't hear it. "Because I can't seem to stop." The words hung between them, confession and surrender all at once. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Inside the small office, two men stood in the growing darkness, Jesse's hand still pressed against Elias's heart, both of them trembling with the weight of everything they just admitted. Jesse pulled his hand back slowly, like it physically hurt to break the contact. "We can't do this here. Not now. There are still men working. If anyone saw—" "I know," Elias said. His heart was still racing, his whole body thrumming with nervous energy. "Tonight," Jesse said, his voice rough, "after everyone's asleep. Meet me at the old line shack on the North Ridge. Do you know it?" Elias nodded. "Come alone. Make sure no one sees you leave." Jesse's eyes burned into his. "And Elias, if you change your mind, if you decide this is too dangerous, just stay away. I'll understand. I won't change my mind." Jesse's jaw tightened. "Then go, before I lose what's left of my control." Elias left, his legs unsteady, his mind reeling. Behind him, he heard the sound of something hitting the desk. Hard, like Jesse had slammed his fist down. He didn't look back. The hours until midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. Elias lay in his bunk, listening to the snores of the other hands, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. When he was certain everyone was deep asleep, he slipped out, moving as quietly as he knew how. The walk to the North Ridge took 20 minutes. The moon was full, turning the landscape silver and strange. Elias's heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. With every step he told himself he could still turn back, but his feet kept moving forward. The line shack appeared out of the darkness, a small structure weathered by years of harsh weather. Lamplight glowed faintly through cracks in the walls. Jesse was already there. Elias pushed open the door. Inside, Jesse stood by the single window, his back to the door. He didn't turn around when Elias entered. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Jesse said quietly. Elias closed the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded impossibly loud in the small space. "I told you I wouldn't change my mind." Jesse finally turned. The lamplight carved deep shadows into his face, making him look older, worn. There's still time to walk away. Once you step forward, once you cross that line, everything changes. Elias looked at him, really looked at him. This hard man who held himself apart from everyone. This man who'd watched him for weeks with hunger in his eyes and never acted on it. This man who even now was giving him one last chance to escape. "I don't want to walk away," Elias said. Something broke in Jesse's expression. All that careful control, all that rigid discipline, cracked like ice under pressure. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, and suddenly his hands were on Elias's face, rough and gentle all at once, tilting his head up. "God help us both," Jesse breathed, and then his mouth found Elias's. The kiss was nothing like Elias had imagined. It was desperate and fierce, years of loneliness and denial pouring out all at once. Jesse kissed him like he was drowning, and Elias was air. His hands slid into Elias's hair, holding him in place, and Elias made a sound he'd never heard himself make before, something between a gasp and a moan. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jesse pressed his forehead against Elias's. "I shouldn't want this. Shouldn't want you." "But you do," Elias whispered. "Every damn day." Jesse's voice was ragged. "Every moment. It's been torture, watching you, wanting to touch you, knowing I couldn't. You can now." Jesse pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes searched Elias's face, looking for any hint of doubt or regret. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he smiled then, really smiled, and it transformed him completely. "Come here," Jesse said, his voice dropping to that low, commanding tone that made Elias's knees weak. And Elias did, closing the distance between them, feeling Jesse's arms wrap around him, solid and sure. They sank down onto the rough wool blanket Jesse had spread on the floor. In the lamplight, they learned each other slowly, reverently. Jesse's hands, so rough from years of ranch work, were incredibly gentle as they traced the curve of Elias's jaw, the line of his throat, the sharp angles of his shoulders. "You're so young," Jesse murmured, almost to himself. "So beautiful. What are you doing to me?" Elias caught one of those wandering hands and brought it to his lips. "The same thing you're doing to me." They stayed there through the night, holding each other in the darkness, talking in whispers about everything they'd never told anyone. Jesse spoke of the loneliness that had eaten at him for years, the careful mask he'd worn, the fear that had kept him isolated. Elias told him about running, about the small town that had been too small to hold who he really was, about the terror of being seen. As dawn approached, they knew they had to return separately. In the growing light, Jesse cupped Elias's face one more time. "Nothing changes at the ranch. We can't afford to let anyone suspect. I know. This stays between us." Jesse's thumb traced Elias's lower lip. "Just ours. Just ours," Elias agreed. They left the line shack separately, Jesse first, then Elias 20 minutes later. By the time the other hands woke for breakfast, they were both back in their bunks, and no one noticed anything different. But everything was different. Now, when Jesse barked orders at Elias in front of the other men, there was a secret language underneath. Now, when their hands brushed passing a bridle, it wasn't an accident. Now, when Jesse's eyes followed Elias across the yard, Elias felt it like a caress. They were careful. So careful. They met at the line shack twice a week, always late at night, always alone. During the day, Jesse was harder on Elias than ever, pushing him relentlessly, and Elias understood why. It was protection. If anyone suspected favoritism, they'd start asking questions. Better to seem too harsh than too kind. The other hands started calling Elias the foreman's whipping boy, but they said it with sympathy, with camaraderie. None of them knew that Elias wore every harsh word like a badge of honor, because he knew what it really meant. Knew that Jesse was protecting them both the only way he could. Summer turned to fall, and the work changed with the seasons. They spent long days moving cattle, repairing fence lines damaged by summer storms, preparing for winter. Through it all, Jesse and Elias maintained their careful distance during the day and found each other in stolen moments at night. But it was getting harder. The need between them was growing, becoming less manageable. Jesse's control was slipping, and they both knew it. It happened on a cold October evening. They were in the main barn, supposedly checking the winter feed stores. The other hands had gone into town for supplies, and they were alone, truly alone on the ranch for the first time in months. Jesse was explaining something about hay rotation, his voice professional and distant, when Elias interrupted him. "Kiss me." Jesse froze. "We can't. Not here. Someone could come back. No one's coming back until after dark. That's hours from now." Elias moved closer. "Please, Jesse, I need—" "Don't," Jesse said, but his voice had gone rough. "Don't ask me that. You know I can't resist when you—" "Then don't resist." For a moment Jesse looked torn. Then with a sound like a man surrendering, he pulled Elias into the shadows of an empty stall and kissed him with all the hunger he'd been holding back for weeks. They were so lost in each other that they didn't hear the barn door open, didn't hear the footsteps, didn't realize they weren't alone until a voice cut through the darkness. "Well, well, what do we have here?" They broke apart instantly. Jesse's face went pale. Standing in the barn entrance, backlit by the fading afternoon sun, was Wade Carson, one of the older ranch hands, a man known for his loose tongue and his love of gossip. "I knew something was off," Wade said, stepping into the barn. His smile was ugly. "I knew it, the way you two looked at each other. But I figured no way. Not Jesse Cord, not the foreman everyone respects so much. But here you are acting like a couple of—" "That's enough," Jesse said. His voice was deadly quiet. "Oh, it's enough?" Wade laughed. "I don't think so. I think we're just getting started. Does the boss know his foreman is a—" "I said that's enough." Jesse moved forward, and there was something in his stance that made Wade take a step back. "You going to hit me?" Wade's eyes glittered with malicious glee. "Go ahead. Make it worse. Give me a bruise to show around town when I tell everyone what I saw." The silence that followed was crushing. Elias felt like he couldn't breathe. This was it. Everything they'd been so careful to hide, exposed in an instant. Their lives were over. They'd be run out of the territory at best, hanged at worst. Jesse's hands had curled into fists. Elias could see him calculating, weighing options, all of them bad. Then Jesse did something Elias didn't expect. He straightened, squared his shoulders, and looked Wade dead in the eye. "Yes," Jesse said quietly. "It's true. Everything you're thinking. Everything you want to say. It's all true." Wade blinked, surprised by the admission. "But before you go running your mouth," Jesse continued, his voice never wavering, "you should know something. I have letters, correspondence with every ranch owner in 3 territories. One word from me, and you'll never work cattle again. You'll be blacklisted from here to California." "You're bluffing," Wade said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Try me," Jesse said. "See what happens. You can destroy my reputation, Wade. You can get me killed. But I promise you, I'll drag you down with me. You'll lose everything, too." The two men stared at each other. The barn was so quiet Elias could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Wade spat in the dirt. "You're both sick," he said. But he was already backing toward the door. "Mark my words. Someone's going to find out. And when they do, I want to be far away from the mess." He left, his footsteps echoing away into the evening. Jesse didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly, all the strength seemed to drain out of him. He sat down heavily on a hay bale, his head in his hands. Elias knelt beside him. "Jesse, what don't?" Jesse said. His voice was hollow. "Just don't. Are those letters real?" Jesse laughed bitterly. "No, I made that up. I have nothing. No leverage. Nothing." He looked up and his eyes were devastated. "We're done, Elias. This is over. You need to pack your things and leave tonight. Get as far away from here as you can." "What?" "No, I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice." Jesse gripped his shoulders. "Wade won't keep his mouth shut forever. He'll get drunk in town, start talking. Within a week, everyone will know. If you're still here, they'll come for you too. Then we'll both go. We'll leave together. And go where?" Jesse's laugh was broken. "We have nothing. No money. Nowhere to run. The West is too small for men like us. There's nowhere we'd be safe." "Then we'll find somewhere," Elias said fiercely. "Jesse, I'm not leaving you. I won't. You have to." Jesse's voice cracked. "Please, if you care about me at all, you'll go. Save yourself." But Elias shook his head. "If I leave, it's only if you come with me." They sat there in the growing darkness, the impossible weight of their situation pressing down on them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the barn walls, carrying with it the first hint of winter's cold. That night, they didn't go to the line shack. Instead, they stayed in the barn, holding each other as plans formed and fell apart, as fear and determination warred in their hearts. And when morning came, they still didn't have an answer. But they had each other, and for now, that would have to be enough. The next 3 days passed in agonizing tension. Wade kept his distance, but his eyes followed them everywhere, his smile knowing and cruel. The other hand sensed something was wrong but couldn't name what. Jesse became more withdrawn, snapping at everyone, working himself to exhaustion. Elias watched him break slowly, watched the weight of fear and responsibility crush him, and he made a decision. On the fourth night, Elias packed his few belongings and went to find Jesse one last time. The foreman was in his office, staring at nothing, a half-empty bottle on the desk in front of him. "I'm leaving," Elias said from the doorway. Jesse looked up, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "Good. That's good. Where will you go?" "North. Maybe Montana. There's ranch work there." Jesse nodded. "Keep your head down. Don't let anyone know where you came from." "I won't." They looked at each other across the small room, both of them memorizing every detail of the other's face. "I'm sorry," Jesse said finally. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." Elias stepped into the office and closed the door. Then he held out his hand. "Come with me." Jesse stared at the offered hand like it was something holy. "You know I can't." "You can. We'll head north together. Find a place so remote no one will bother us. Work a homestead. It won't be easy, but I'm 34 years old, Elias. I've built a life here, a reputation. I can't just... Your reputation is already gone. Wade will make sure of that. You said so yourself." Jesse flinched. "Maybe he'll keep quiet." "You don't believe that any more than I do." Jesse looked down at his hands, those strong, capable hands that Elias loved. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm afraid." Elias crossed the room and knelt beside Jesse's chair. "I know. I'm afraid too. But I'd rather be afraid together than safe and alone." For a long moment, Jesse didn't respond. Then slowly, he reached out and took Elias's hand. His grip was tight, almost painful. "Montana," he said finally. "There's a place I heard about once. A valley so deep in the mountains, you need a native guide just to find it. A few homesteaders there, people who wanted to disappear. Then let's disappear." Jesse looked at him, really looked at him, and something in his expression shifted. The fear was still there, but underneath it, for the first time, Elias saw hope. "We leave tonight," Jesse said. "Before dawn. We take horses and supplies, enough to get us through the mountains." They spent the next hours preparing in silence, moving through the familiar patterns of packing for a journey, but this time knowing it was one way. When everything was ready, they stood in the dark barn one last time. "No regrets?" Jesse asked quietly. "None," Elias said. Jesse pulled him close, fierce and desperate. "I love you. I should have said it before. I love you. I love you too. They left Blackwater Ranch in the darkest hour before dawn, two riders heading north into the unknown. Behind them, the life Jesse had built for 15 years. Ahead, a future with no guarantees, no safety, no certainty of anything except each other. As the first light touched the eastern horizon, they stopped at the top of a ridge and looked back one last time at the ranch spread out below them in the valley. Then Jesse turned his horse north, and Elias followed. The journey was hard. They traveled fast, avoiding towns, sleeping rough, always watchful for pursuit. But as the days passed and no one followed, they began to believe they might actually make it. Weeks later, high in the Montana mountains, they found the valley Jesse had heard about. It was everything he'd promised, a hidden place where the world couldn't reach them. They found a piece of land no one had claimed, a creek running through it, good timber, and soil that might, with enough work, be coaxed into yielding a crop. They built a cabin together, Jesse teaching Elias the skills he'd need. The work was backbreaking, but every log they raised, every nail they drove, felt like a promise. This was theirs. No one could take it away. The first snow came early that year. On a night when the wind howled outside and the fire crackled in their small hearth, they lay together in the bed they'd built, wrapped in quilts and each other's warmth. "Do you ever regret it?" Elias asked quietly. "Everything you gave up?" Jesse was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing idle patterns on Elias's shoulder. "Every day," he said finally. "Then, and not once." Elias turned to look at him, confused by the contradiction. Jesse smiled, that rare, soft smile that he only showed when they were alone. "I regret that the world is the way it is. I regret that we had to run. I regret that I can't take you into town on my arm and tell everyone you're mine." He pulled Elias closer. "But I don't regret you. Not for a second." Outside, the snow fell silently, blanketing their valley in white, erasing their tracks, hiding them from the world. Inside, two men who'd risked everything for love held each other close and knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Years would pass. They'd build their homestead into something real, something lasting. A few other souls would find their way to the hidden valley, people running from different things but bound by the same need for refuge. And among these outcasts, Jesse and Elias would build something they'd both thought impossible, a home. But that night, in their first winter together, they asked for nothing more than what they already had: the howl of the wind, the warmth of the fire, and each other, finally free to love, without fear, without shame, without secrets. Just two men in a vast wilderness, building a life one day at a time, together. The Montana winter settled over their valley like a blessing and a curse. The snow came heavy, sealing them away from the outside world, making their small cabin an island in a sea of white. For weeks at a time, they saw no one but each other. And in that isolation, something remarkable happened. They stopped being afraid. Jesse woke each morning to find Elias already up, feeding the fire, his silhouette framed against the window where weak winter light struggled through. The sight never failed to make Jesse's chest tighten with something that felt too big for his body. He had spent so many years alone, had convinced himself that loneliness was simply his fate. Now, watching Elias move through their small cabin with easy familiarity, Jesse understood what he'd been missing all those years. "Come back to bed," Jesse would murmur, his voice still rough with sleep. "It's too cold to be up." Elias would turn, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Someone has to keep us from freezing. You sleep like the dead. I sleep like a man who finally has a reason to rest easy." Those words, simple as they were, carried the weight of 15 years of vigilance finally set down. In this hidden valley, Jesse had learned to sleep without one ear cocked for danger, without his gun under his pillow, without the constant fear that someone would discover his secret. Here, with Elias, he could simply be. They fell into patterns that felt like they'd been doing this for years instead of months. Elias would cook breakfast while Jesse tended the horses. They'd work together splitting wood, mending equipment, checking the traps they'd set for winter game. Every task became an opportunity to be close, to brush hands, to steal moments that back at Blackwater Ranch would have been impossible. One afternoon, while they were stacking firewood against the cabin wall, Elias asked the question that had been hovering between them since they'd arrived. "Do you think they're looking for us?" Jesse paused, an armload of split logs balanced against his chest. He'd been asking himself the same question every day. "I don't know. Probably not. Two hands leaving a ranch isn't that unusual. Wade might have talked, but without us there to verify his story, it's just gossip. But you're not sure." "I'm not sure," Jesse admitted. He set down the wood and straightened, his back protesting the motion. "All I know is that we made a choice. We chose this life, this place, each other. Whatever consequences come from that, we'll face them together." Elias stepped closer, close enough that Jesse could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real. That we're here. That you're here with me." Jesse reached up and cupped Elias's face, his work roughened, thumb tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. "Believe it. This is as real as anything I've ever known." They stood like that for a long moment, the winter wind swirling snow around them, the valley spread out below in pristine white silence. Then Elias leaned in and kissed him, soft and sweet and unhurried, because here they had all the time in the world. As winter deepened, they discovered other homesteaders scattered throughout the valley. The first they met was a woman named Margaret, who rode up to their cabin one gray afternoon with a rifle across her saddle and a bundle of dried venison as an offering. "Heard we had new neighbors," she said, her weathered face creasing into a smile. "Thought I'd come, make sure you boys weren't planning to starve before spring." She was in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that saw everything but judged nothing. Over coffee in their small cabin, she explained that the valley held about 15 people, all of them running from something or someone. "We don't ask questions here," Margaret said, cradling her tin cup. "Don't matter what brought you. What matters is whether you'll pull your weight and respect the peace we've built." She looked between Jesse and Elias with those knowing eyes. "And before you worry, I've seen how you two look at each other. Known since the moment I rode up what you are to each other. Won't hear a word of judgment from me or mine." Jesse felt something in his chest loosen. "You're saying we're safe here? Safe as anywhere can be for folks like us." Margaret took a sip of her coffee. "We had a couple like you boys years back. They're gone now, moved on to California. But while they were here, they were family. That's what we do in this valley. We make family out of strangers." After Margaret left, Jesse and Elias stood in the doorway watching her ride away through the snow. The knowledge that they weren't entirely alone, that there were others who understood, who accepted, felt like a weight lifted they hadn't known they were carrying. That night, as they lay together in their bed listening to the wind howl outside, Elias said quietly, "I think we're going to be all right." Jesse pulled him closer, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and winter air that clung to his hair. "I think so too. Spring came late to the Montana mountains, but when it arrived, it transformed the valley overnight. Snow melted to reveal new grass, wildflowers burst from the earth in riots of color, and the creek that ran through Jesse and Elias's property swelled with runoff. With the thaw came work, endless work, breaking ground for planting, repairing winter damage, preparing for the growing season. And with spring came visitors. Margaret brought others from the valley to meet them. There was Thomas, a former soldier who deserted rather than return east after the war. Sarah and Ruth, two women who lived together in a cabin on the North Slope and called each other sisters, but whose relationship was clearly something more. Old Pete, who'd been living in the valley longer than anyone could remember, and who knew every plant and animal for miles around. They came with offerings of seeds and tools, advice and friendship. And slowly, Jesse and Elias found themselves part of something they'd never experienced before. A community of outcasts who'd built their own society in the wilderness, one where the rules of the outside world didn't apply. One warm evening in May, Margaret organized a gathering at her homestead. Everyone in the valley came, bringing food and drink and music. Jesse stood on the edges of it all, watching Elias laugh at something Thomas was saying, watching him be welcomed and accepted, and felt a fierce gratitude that threatened to overwhelm him. Margaret appeared at his elbow, a knowing smile on her weathered face. "That boy of yours fits right in." Jesse didn't bother denying the claim. "He does. Better than I do, I think. That's because you're still waiting for the other boot to drop." She looked at him with those sharp eyes. "You're still expecting someone to come take this away from you." Jesse couldn't deny it. Old habits died hard. Even here, even surrounded by people who accepted them. Part of him was always listening for hoofbeats, always watching the ridgeline for riders. Margaret patted his arm. "Give it time. Eventually you'll learn to believe you deserve this." She nodded toward Elias. "He already knows. That's why he's over there making friends while you're over here brooding." Jesse huffed a laugh. Fair point. As the evening wore on and someone produced a fiddle, people began to dance. Jesse watched from his spot by the fire as couples paired off, swaying to the music under the darkening sky. He saw Sarah pull Ruth close, saw them dance together openly, without fear, without shame. Something in his chest ached at the sight. Then Elias was there, holding out his hand. "Dance with me." Jesse looked around at the gathered crowd. People are watching. Let them watch. Elias's smile was gentle but determined. "This is why we came here, isn't it? So we could stop hiding." Jesse looked at that outstretched hand for a long moment. 15 years of caution, of vigilance, of fear, warred with the desire to simply take what was being offered. Then he remembered Wade's ugly sneer, remembered the terror of being discovered, remembered making the choice to run rather than deny what he felt. He took Elias's hand. They danced slowly, carefully, both of them stiff and uncertain at first. Jesse was acutely aware of the eyes on them, even though when he glanced around, most people had gone back to their own conversations, their own partners. Margaret caught his eye and raised her cup in a small salute. Gradually, Jesse relaxed. Elias was warm against him, solid and real, and the music was sweet in the mountain air. They moved together in the firelight, just two men dancing, and it was the most natural thing in the world. When the "I didn't" song ended, Elias looked up at him with shining eyes. "Thank you. For what? For choosing me. For choosing this. For being brave enough to dance with me in front of everyone." Jesse pulled him closer, his voice dropping low. "I'd choose you 1,000 times over, in front of everyone or in private, in this valley or anywhere in the world." The words were a vow, and they both knew it. As summer settled over the valley, Jesse and Elias's homestead began to truly take shape. The garden Elias had planted with seeds from Margaret grew lush and green. The cabin they'd built survived a series of violent thunderstorms without leaking. The horses they'd brought from Blackwater Ranch thrived on the mountain grass. Slowly, impossibly, they were building a life. But the past had a way of catching up. It was a hot afternoon in July when the stranger rode into the valley. Jesse was working in the garden when he heard the hoofbeats, and something in the rhythm of them made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He straightened, shading his eyes against the sun, and watched the rider approach. The man was young, maybe 25, dressed in trail dust and wearing a gun low on his hip. He pulled up at the edge of their property and dismounted, his movements careful, deliberate. "Jesse Cord," the stranger said. It wasn't a question. Jesse's hand moved instinctively toward the knife at his belt. "Who's asking?" "Name's Daniel Webster. I worked at Blackwater Ranch. Was there when you left?" Jesse's blood ran cold. Behind him, he heard the cabin door open, heard Elias step out onto the porch. Every muscle in Jesse's body tensed, ready for violence, ready to protect what was his. Daniel held up his hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I need to tell you something." "Say it quick, then ride out," Jesse said, his voice hard. Daniel glanced at Elias, then back to Jesse. "Wade Carson is dead." The words hung in the air. Jesse felt Elias move closer, felt him standing just behind his shoulder. "How?" Jesse asked flatly. "Fell off his horse drunk 3 months back. Broke his neck." Daniel shifted his weight. Before he died, though, he talked. Told everyone what he saw in the barn that day. Told them about you and the boy. Jesse's jaw clenched. And the boss fired me when I said I didn't care. Said he wouldn't have men working for him who'd defend that kind of behavior. Daniel's expression was carefully neutral. So I left. Been riding for 2 months trying to find you. Why? Elias asked, speaking for the first time. Why come all this way to tell us? Daniel looked at him directly. Because I thought you should know what you're facing. Thought you deserved a warning that your names are being spoken, that people know you're out here somewhere. He paused. And because I wanted you to know that not everyone back there thinks what you did was wrong. The statement sat heavy between them. Jesse studied the young man's face, looking for deception, for threat, and found only sincerity. There's something else, Daniel continued. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. The boss kept back wages that were owed to you both, said you'd forfeited it when you left without notice. I waited until he was in town one day and took it from his office. Figured it was yours by right. He held out the pouch. Jesse took it slowly, feeling the weight of coins inside. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had. This is stealing, Jesse said. Daniel smiled faintly. Then I guess I'm a thief. He looked between them. I'm heading to California. Heard there's ranch work there, and maybe people care a bit less about who a man shares his bed with. Just thought you should know you've got a friend out there, if you ever need one. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. Take care of each other. They watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared beyond the ridge. When he was gone, Elias let out a shaky breath. Do you think more will come? Jesse weighed the question. Maybe. Probably. But Daniel came to warn us, not to harm us. That has to count for something. That night they lay awake long after the lamps were out, both of them listening to every sound, every crack of settling wood, every rustle of wind. The news of Wade's death should have brought relief, but instead it brought fear. Now their secret was fully exposed. Now people knew. What if someone comes looking for trouble? Elias whispered into the darkness. Jesse pulled him closer. Then we'll deal with it, together, like we've dealt with everything else. But Jesse didn't sleep that night. He lay awake, one hand resting on the revolver he'd placed on the bedside table, and watched the shadows shift across the ceiling. He'd thought running to this hidden valley would be enough. Thought distance would protect them. But the world was smaller than he'd hoped, and secrets had a way of traveling. The weeks following Daniel's visit were tense. Jesse found himself watching the ridgeline constantly, waiting for more riders. He and Elias talked about leaving, about going deeper into the wilderness, about running again. But something held them back. This was their home. They'd built it with their own hands, had planted roots here, both literal and figurative. The thought of abandoning it felt like losing a part of themselves. Margaret noticed the change in them. She rode over one afternoon and found Jesse pacing their property line, rifle in hand. Expecting someone? She asked mildly. Jesse explained about Daniel's visit, about Wade's death, about the exposure of their secret. Margaret listened without interrupting, her weathered face thoughtful. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know, this valley exists because people like us decided to stop running. We decided to make a stand, to build something worth defending." She looked at him directly. Question is, are you going to keep running, or are you going to trust that you've found somewhere worth staying? And if someone comes, Jesse asked, if someone comes looking to cause trouble? Margaret's smile was thin but fierce. Then they'll learn that this valley protects its own. She patted the rifle on her saddle. We didn't come all this way to let the outside world tell us how to live. Neither did you. After she left, Jesse stood at the edge of his property, looking at the cabin he and Elias had built, at the garden growing green and lush, at the mountains rising on all sides like guardians. He thought about Margaret's words, about making a stand, about trusting. When Elias came out to find him, Jesse pulled him close. "I think we stay." Elias looked up at him, searching his face. "You're sure?" "No," Jesse admitted. "But I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. This is our home. If we have to defend it, then that's what we'll do." They stood together in the fading light, two men who'd risked everything for love, who'd built a life in the wilderness, who'd found a community of others like them. The future was uncertain. Danger might still come. But they would face it here, together, in the place they'd chosen. As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, life settled back into routine. The tension of waiting for trouble gradually eased as weeks passed without incident. The harvest came in better than expected, and they spent long days preserving food for winter. The community gathered for a celebration, grateful for the bounty the land had provided. It was at this celebration that Jesse finally understood what Margaret had been trying to tell him. He watched Thomas and old Pete arguing good-naturedly over the best way to smoke venison, watched Sarah and Ruth dancing together without a care for who might see, watched Elias laughing with some of the younger homesteaders, fully at ease in a way Jesse had never seen him at Blackwater Ranch. This was what freedom looked like, not the absence of danger, because danger could come anywhere, but the presence of choice, the ability to live honestly, to love openly, to build a life that reflected who they truly were, rather than who the world demanded they pretend to be. Margaret appeared beside him with 2 cups of cider. "You've got that thinking look on your face." Jesse took the offered cup, just realizing something. "And what's that?" "That I've spent my whole life trying to earn the right to exist, trying to be good enough, tough enough, respectable enough that people wouldn't look too close at what I was hiding." He took a sip of the cider, sweet and sharp on his tongue. "But here, I don't have to earn anything. I can just be." Margaret smiled. "Took you long enough to figure that out." She raised her cup. "To freedom. Not the kind you fight for, but the kind you build, one day at a time." "To freedom," Jesse echoed. That night, as he and Elias walked back to their cabin under a sky brilliant with stars, Jesse felt something he'd never experienced before. Peace. Real peace. Not the exhausted quiet after battle, but the deep contentment of a man who'd finally found his place in the world. Elias reached for his hand as they walked, their fingers intertwining. Jesse didn't pull away, didn't check to see if anyone was watching. He just held on, grateful for the warmth, for the connection, for the simple joy of walking hand in hand with the person he loved. When they reached their cabin, Elias turned to him. "I have something to tell you." Jesse felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" Elias smiled, a little nervous. "I've been talking to Margaret and Thomas about expanding our property. There's a piece of land adjacent to ours that no one's claimed. I thought maybe if we worked it, we could run some cattle. Make this a real ranch." Jesse stared at him. "You want to stay? Not just for now, but permanently." "I want to build a life here," Elias said. "A real one. With you." He stepped closer. "I want us to have something that's ours. Not something we're running from or hiding in, but something we're building toward." Jesse pulled him close, resting his forehead against Elias's. "Yes. God, yes. Let's build it. Let's build something that lasts." They kissed then, slow and deep, a promise sealed between them. When they finally pulled apart, Elias was grinning. "Margaret said if we expand, we might need help. Said she knows a couple of young men who are looking for work in a safe place, men like us." Jesse felt his throat tighten. "We'd be building more than a ranch. We'd be building a refuge. Isn't that what this whole valley is?" Elias asked. "A refuge for people the world doesn't want?" Jesse looked out at the darkened valley, at the scattered lights of other homesteads, at the mountains standing sentinel in the starlight. "Yes, I suppose it is." They went inside, and Jesse built up the fire while Elias lit the lamps. As the cabin filled with warm light, Jesse watched Elias move around their small space with easy familiarity and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Gratitude for the choice they'd made. Gratitude for this hidden valley. Gratitude for every moment that had led them here. Later, lying in bed with Elias curled against his side, Jesse spoke into the darkness. "I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." Elias pressed closer. "I know. You show me every day. Every time you choose to stay. Every time you build something with me instead of running. That's how I know." Jesse kissed the top of his head. "We're going to make this work. The ranch, the life, all of it." "We already have," Elias murmured, already half asleep. "Everything else is just details." As Jesse drifted off, he thought about the strange path that had led him here. The years of loneliness, the fear of discovery, the terror of that moment in the barn at Blackwater Ranch, the desperate flight into the mountains. All of it had seemed like the end of his world at the time, but it had been the beginning of something he'd never dared to hope for. A life lived honestly, a love without shame, a home built on truth rather than lies. The wind rattled the shutters, but inside their cabin it was warm and safe. Jesse closed his eyes and let sleep take him, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Two men who'd refused to let the world tell them how to love, who'd found a place where they could simply be themselves. And in that hidden Montana valley, surrounded by others who'd made the same brave choice, Jesse Cord finally learned what it meant to be free. Years passed in the valley, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the steady work of building a life. Jesse and Elias expanded their homestead into a thriving ranch, just as they'd planned. They took in the young men Margaret had mentioned, providing refuge and honest work to those who needed a safe place to land. The valley community grew stronger, more self-sufficient, a small society of outcasts who'd created their own world. Jesse's hair turned more gray than dark. Lines deepened around his eyes, earned by years of squinting into mountain sun and smiling more than he ever had in his youth. Elias grew from a nervous 19-year-old into a confident man who could gentle the wildest horse and whose laugh could light up their entire valley. On a warm spring evening, 20 years after they'd first arrived in Montana, Jesse sat on the porch of their much-expanded cabin and watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Elias came out and settled beside him, their shoulders touching in the comfortable way of people who'd spent decades learning the shape of each other. "Thinking about anything in particular?" Elias asked. Jesse considered the question. "Just how strange life is. How the worst moment of my life, getting caught in that barn, led to the best years of my life. Regret anything? Not a single moment." Jesse took Elias's hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. "You?" Elias smiled, only that it took us so long to find each other. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared. From down the valley came the sound of voices, the younger people gathering for an evening of music and celebration. Their valley had become a haven for dozens of people now, all of them drawn by whispered rumors of a place where you could live as you truly were. "We built something good here," Elias said softly. "We did," Jesse agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." As darkness settled over the valley and the sounds of celebration drifted up from below, Jesse reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The fear and the flight, the hard work and harder winters, the slow building of trust and community. It hadn't been easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But it had been worth it. Every moment of terror, every sacrifice, every risk had been worth it for this. For a life lived honestly, for love without shame, for the simple, profound freedom of being able to sit on his own porch with the man he loved and not have to hide. The West was still harsh. The world outside their valley still held danger for men like them. But here, in this hidden place they'd claimed and built and defended, they were safe. They were free. They were home. And that, Jesse thought as Elias leaned against his shoulder and the stars wheeled overhead, was more than enough. It was everything. The sound of footsteps on the porch steps broke into Jesse's thoughts. A young man appeared, maybe 22 or 23, his hat in his hands. It was Marcus, one of the ranch hands they'd taken in 3 years back. Like so many others, he'd arrived with nothing but a worn bedroll and eyes that had seen too much rejection. "Sorry to interrupt," Marcus said, his voice hesitant. "Just wanted to let you know the horses are settled for the night, and to say thank you for everything." Jesse nodded. "You've earned your place here, Marcus. You work harder than anyone. It's not just the work." Marcus looked between them, his expression open and vulnerable in a way it hadn't been when he'd first arrived. "It's knowing there's a place in this world where I don't have to pretend, where I can just be myself. You and Elias, you built that. Not just for yourselves, but for all of us." After Marcus left, Elias squeezed Jesse's hand. "Hear that? We're inspiring the youth now." Jesse huffed a laugh. "Never thought I'd be anyone's inspiration. Spent most of my life just trying to survive. That's exactly why you inspire them." Elias turned to look at him, his eyes reflecting starlight. "You survived when the world told you that you shouldn't exist. You built a life when everyone said it was impossible. You loved me when loving another man could have gotten us both killed." "We loved each other," Jesse corrected gently. "This wasn't just my doing. No, but you were the one who had to make the hardest choice." Elias's voice grew soft with memory. "I was 19. Had nothing to lose. You were 34, had a reputation, a position, a life you'd spent 15 years building, and you gave it all up. For me, for us." Jesse pulled him closer. "Best decision I ever made." They sat in silence for a while, watching the lights in the valley below. Margaret's place was lit up bright, probably hosting another gathering. Thomas and old Pete's cabins glowed warm. Sarah and Ruth's home on the north slope showed 2 figures moving past the windows, probably getting ready for bed after a long day's work. This community they'd built, this refuge for people the world rejected, it had become something larger than Jesse had ever imagined that desperate night when they'd fled Blackwater Ranch. They'd created a place where love in all its forms could exist without shame, where people could build families that didn't fit the world's narrow definitions, where the only requirement for belonging was the courage to live honestly. "Do you ever wonder what happened to the others?" Elias asked. "The ones from Blackwater?" "Sometimes." Jesse thought about the men they'd worked alongside, the boss who'd never known what was happening under his nose, the town that had turned on them so quickly. "I hope they found their own peace, whatever form that took. Even Wade?" Jesse considered the question. "Even Wade. He was a cruel man, but cruelty usually comes from fear. Maybe in his last moments, falling from that horse, he found some kind of understanding. Maybe not. Either way, his judgment doesn't matter anymore. We're beyond his reach now. Beyond everyone's reach," Elias agreed. "Out here at the end of the world." "Not the end," Jesse corrected. "The beginning. Every person who finds this valley gets a new start, a chance to begin again, without the weight of who they were expected to be." A coyote howled in the distance, its cry echoing off the mountain walls. The sound was lonely but somehow comforting, a reminder that they shared this wild place with creatures who lived by their own rules, who survived by adapting to the harsh beauty of the frontier. "I've been thinking," Elias said after a moment, "about writing it all down, our story, not for publication or anything like that, just so that someday, long after we're gone, someone might find it and know that we existed, that we loved each other, that we built something that mattered." Jesse felt his throat tighten. "That's a fine idea. Would you help me? I was never much for writing, but you've got a way with words when you want to. We'll do it together," Jesse said. "Like everything else, we'll tell the truth about what it cost and what we gained, about the fear and the freedom, about finding home in each other when the world had no place for us." Elias leaned his head against Jesse's shoulder, and they sat together as the night deepened around them. In the distance, the music from Margaret's gathering drifted up on the wind, fiddle and laughter, and the sound of people living without fear. Their valley, their refuge, their home. Tomorrow they'd rise with the sun and return to the endless work of the ranch. They'd check fences and tend horses, help Marcus and the other hands with whatever needed doing. They'd share meals with their community, swap stories, offer help where it was needed. They'd live another day of the life they'd fought so hard to build. But tonight, they simply sat together on the porch they'd built with their own hands, watching stars wheel overhead in the vast Montana sky. Two men who'd refused to accept the world's verdict on who they were allowed to love. Two men who'd found each other in the darkness and built a light that still burned bright after 20 years. Jesse thought about that terrified moment in the barn at Blackwater Ranch when Wade had discovered them and their whole world had shattered. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything, but it had been the beginning of everything that mattered. The beginning of honest love, of true freedom, of a life lived without lies. "You know what the strange thing is," Jesse said quietly. "If I could go back and change it, warn my younger self, help us avoid getting caught, I wouldn't. Because that moment of terror led to all of this. Led to us being here, together, free." "I know what you mean." Elias's voice was thoughtful. "Sometimes the worst moments become doorways to the best ones. We just have to be brave enough to walk through." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers, of wood smoke and mountain air. It was the smell of home. Not the home of Jesse's childhood, with its rigid rules and harsh judgments, but the home they'd created together. A home built on truth and love and the simple courage to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year. As the moon rose over the eastern peaks, casting silver light across their valley, Jesse Cord held Elias close and felt, perhaps for the first time in his 54 years, completely at peace. The past no longer haunted him. The future no longer frightened him. He simply existed in this perfect moment, grateful beyond words for the man beside him and the life they'd built together. And when they finally rose and went inside, when they banked the fire and climbed into the bed they'd shared for 20 years, when Elias's breathing deepened into sleep and Jesse lay awake a little longer, savoring the warmth and the quiet, he whispered a prayer of thanks to whatever force in the universe had brought them together. For love, for freedom, for home, for second chances and new beginnings, for a hidden valley in the Montana mountains, where two men could live honestly and love openly and build something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. For everything,